Well, it's been 5 years now since Gabriel Wortman murdered 22 people across 2 days in northern Nova Scotia, the largest mass murder in Canada's history. Still, many questions remain about how it all played out over those 2 days and what police knew and did before, during, and after the bloodshed. Paul Palango is an author and investigative journalist. He has written extensively about the massacre that was handled and investigated by authorities. He's the author of 22 Murders, Investigating the Massacres, Coverup, and Obstacles to Justice in Nova Scotia. His latest, the follow-up, published this month by Penguin Random House. It's called Anatomy of a Cover-Up, The Truth About the RCMP and the Nova Scotia Massacres. Paul Palango, so great to have you with us here. Welcome to the program.
Hey, good to be back, Rob.
Well, let me ask you this question, because this book is about trying to find the truth. Is it still possible, do you think, at this point, to really fully understand and document the truth of what happened over those days?
I think, I've been doing this for 5 years, along with some citizen investigators. And it was quite clear from the beginning, before the Mass Casualty Commission even sat, I wrote 22 Murders. And note, I put in the subtitle, The Cover-Up and the Obstacles to Justice. Mm-hmm. Because I sensed this is what they were doing. The evidence told me they were doing this. And I wanted to force the Mass Casualty Commission, the federal provincial public inquiry set up to investigate it, to deal with all the people and all the scenarios I raised. That I knew they would hide it and come up with a false narrative. And I sat there, and then we spent more than a year going through all the documents. And so how do we prove this? It's the negative proof in large measure. You know what the negative proof is? You take what is purported to be the truth, and in their narrative, take their narrative as the truth and prove it wrong.
Right.
So I proved it wrong in this book, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, time and time again, which means if their truth is not the truth, there's another truth out there. And I suggest and actually prove what some of the other stories are. But what this whole thing is, one of my citizen investigators, Ryan Potter, he said the other day as he was going through the book, which just came out today officially, he went through the book and he says, imagine this thing as a train trip that begins before the massacres in 2020, through the massacres and up till now. And the train stops at a bunch of stations along the way over the years. Every stop, he said, there's a screw up. There's something not right. The story's not right. He says every single one of us. So the narrative was shaped, and what I've done is sort of disassemble that narrative and provide you with clues to what the real narrative is.
What do you think then is so damaging or embarrassing or even scandalous about the truth?
I think there are so many issues that they're hiding. I think the number one issue that I always suspected was that Gabriel Wortman, the shooter, was a confidential informant for the RCMP or an agent. We don't know, but they're not, the government's not allowed to tell you or admit he was, even after he's died. That was one thing to cover up. But then all the debacles that happened during the 13-and-a-half-hour murder spree, at every stop along the way, something happened. And they covered it up and massaged the story to make it look like to give the RCMP a semblance of heroism.
Well, it's about why the truth matters here, right? Because 22 people were murdered that day. And so it's not just a question about how it was handled after the fact. The before and during are about where lives are on the line here. And did 22 people need to die? Like, this really cuts to maybe the most important question here, right, Paul? That did these people, or did all of them, really need to die here?
No, certainly not. I mean, one of the key witnesses, the way I tell the story is that 16 people who were very close to Gabriel Wortman were excluded from being examined in public at the Mass Casualty Commission out of fear of further traumatizing them.
Right.
But when you go through their evidence, that's where the real story seems to lie. And one of those witnesses is a Halifax cop who gave a statement, and shortly after the massacres, and he was a friend of Wortman's. And in that, he says Wortman was not going to give his money to anyone. He wasn't doing all this stuff. He didn't think he was going to die. He said Wortman was a guy who was essentially, there's one word missing in what he said. It's sort of inaudible, but it could only mean he was a dead man walking in Canada is essentially what he was saying. He had to get away. He planned to fake his own death. Something went wrong. And I firmly believe that's the story. I've always believed that was the story. But I eventually found it in the evidence that they buried, that Wortman was. So if you take that scenario, well, how did he know that? And why was Wortman a dead man walking? And from the beginning, I connected this to him having his cover blown when that the Hells Angels or some group like that were after him.
But why did he do it? Why did he kill so many people? Can we ever really fully understand that?
I don't know if we can really understand it. I think the key to that is his so-called common law wife. And if you read the book, you'll see why I say so-called. I think she knows, and she's been entirely protected by the system. You know, nobody's allowed to ask a question of her, a really meaningful question. She's never been cross-examined. And she's been considered a victim from the beginning. And I spent 4 chapters essentially laying out the real story as far as I can see it.
I want to talk about the public inquiry, the Mass Casualty Commission that was set up that was supposed to be about getting to the truth. And I guess maybe in some ways, some of the documents it produced, it did shed a lot of light on what happened. But what was this whole exercise in your view?
Like many public inquiries in Canada over the last 40 years, it was used as a public policy tool to engineer public opinion, sort of to manufacture consent to the story. So the RCMP original story was it was a domestic violence case gone wrong, and this man went off his rocker. And then the Mass Casualty Commission did everything it could to make that story work. And I spent 500 pages showing you that that wasn't the story.
Where was it of some value, though? Because as you detail in the book, a lot of your investigative work sort of started from information that emerged through the commission or documents that emerged through the commission. Did it help at least open up avenues of investigation?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we did a book launch party on Sunday, and it struck me when I was talking that the RCMP and the justice system is really good at manufacturing stories. So the RCMP likes to say, likes to promote its ability to do Mr. Big Stings and get criminals and lure them into these fantastic scenarios. And it struck me that what we did is I took a bunch of ordinary people who are forgotten, otherwise ignored, and turned them into investigators, willing investigators who worked on their own time. And we did like a Mr. Little sting on the police, the government, and the justice system. And we essentially played them, set them up, made them produce documents. Then we showed that we could penetrate the RCMP, the DOJ, the Mass Casualty Commission, get things out. So let them know that you better produce things because we're going to find them. And so they didn't know what we didn't know or what we did know. So they had to produce documents. Then they massaged the narrative, hid those documents. Then we spent a year going through the record. And there's like 1 million words in the last report, probably 2 million words and graphs in the underlying documents. Very difficult to search, but we went through them and we found some smoking guns.
What stood out to you then in terms of what you found that might have even come as a surprise to you?
Well, one of the lingering questions was the murder of Corey Ellison, who was visiting his father at Portapique that Saturday night in April 18th, 2020. And his brother Clinton, people who remember this incident remember his brother Clinton and being interviewed the next day or day after, about hiding in the woods for 4 hours and being hunted down and stuff like this. And afterwards, Clinton Ellison would say, I think the Mounties killed my brother. And then he had some issues, and then he would say, oh, no, I apologize. And then he'd go back, I think they killed my brother. Well, the evidence we've gone through seriously makes the case that Gabriel Wortman did not kill Corey Ellison.
Wow.
And if he did not kill Corey Ellison, who killed Corey Ellison? And by going through everything, it looks like the Mounties accidentally shot Corey Ellison. That's the argument I can make. And that's one of the things they had to cover up that night.
Well, and as you go through it and you detail what witnesses were saying, what was on the 911 calls, all of the evidence, it was a lot of panic. It was a lot of confusion. It was a very unorganized response. And I guess in part, maybe that's where sort of the embarrassment comes for the RCMP is how they handled all of this.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a former deputy commissioner of the RCMP call me shortly after it happened and said, this is the worst day in the history of the RCMP, and this is likely the end of the force. That's how dramatic that was, if people forget. And so the system rallied around the RCMP to protect them and create a narrative that Canadians would buy, much like they've done in the past with other public inquiries. Not get to the answer that was right, but get to the answer the government wanted to be right. And in this case, they shaped the narrative to probably cover up the shooting of who really shot Corey Ellison. There needs to be an investigation there, and we will pursue that. Another thing they did, Rob, about 2 years after the murder of Constable Heidi Stevenson, who was the 20th victim of Wortman, the RCMP and the Mass Casualty Commission came up with a scenario that Heidi Stevenson actually got out of her car and fired 14 shots and was involved in a heroic gun battle with Wortman and actually wounded Wortman, and that's how he was identified eventually. I went through all the evidence, and I was writing in this book that I don't believe that happened. And as I was double checking the records, I came across a document, an exchange of documents between the then head of the RCMP, the chief operations officer, Chief Superintendent Chris Leather, and the interim head of the Serious Incident Response Team, the police watchdog. And in that exchange, it shows how the RCMP admitted she had been executed. And then after the RCMP union said, oh, she rammed Wortman and took him off the road, that didn't happen. And then the RCMP came up with this scenario that, well, maybe she wounded Joey Weber, the 21st victim, and there should be an investigation of this. And the interim director, Pat Curran, sent the surety letter back to the RCMP 2 or 3 days after the massacre saying, essentially, how dare you? I'm not going to try to prove there was a gunfight that didn't happen. Right. You said in your own words on Sunday, as you investigated it, that she was executed. And 27 witnesses, well, most of the 27 witnesses never saw her get out of her car. So this raises questions about planted evidence and things like that. So this was never really investigated by the MCC. But they needed a hero, and they decided to make Heidi Stevenson a hero when she was put into a situation she shouldn't have been put into. 19 people were dead. It'd been going on for 12 and a half hours, and she was alone in her car. Yeah. The RCMP needed to, and she was not very well trained, even though she'd been on the force 25 years. She'd failed all her carbine testing, and in fact had been kicked out of the class and wasn't allowed to even apply anymore. So she wasn't tactically sound. She was alone on her own, and she was killed. So instead of admitting that and getting into it, the governments, the Nova Scotia federal government, DOJ, and the RCMP decided to turn her into a hero with what looks to me like a fabricated story.
Yeah. What do we know about Wortman's end, or the end of this part of the timeline and his death? Do we have a clear picture of how that unfolded?
As I said before, we penetrated all the organizations and sort of made them very paranoid about what was going on, so they'd look screwy at each other. And one of the things we uncovered through a source we developed called True Blue were videotapes showing the execution of Wortman. And the RCMP, again, promoted the hero story that two Mounties stumbled onto Wortman and identified him by the wound on his head from Heidi Stevenson's bullet that was never fired. He got the wound somewhere else. Said that they recognized Heidi Stevenson's gun in his hand, et cetera, et cetera. And we were able to show that. And the Mass Casualty Commission, this is what they did, Rob, to understand how this worked. The whole incident involving the shooting of Wortman, from the time the RCMP vehicle stops till the first shots are fired with the officer outside the car, two officers outside the car firing, is 5.5 seconds. And when the MCC analyzed that tape, it took them more than an hour, probably 2 hours, because they went frame by frame by frame to make it look like it took a longer time than it did. And then when we at Frank Magazine lobbied or went to court to get that all those documents out and to get all the film, they still did not produce it all. But what they did do was deflect the media's attention away from that story by having Brenda Lucky accused of political interference in the investigation. So Brenda Lucky became the story. She resigned, and this story disappeared from the public view.
How close was Wortman to getting away, though, do you think?
He seemed to think, if you look at Barry Warnell's testimony, he seems to think that he was going to get away. Because one of the things, they said, he went on this mad rampage and he started killing people after a fight with his girlfriend. But he had a brick of $20,000 in the back of his car, changes of clothing, and a bunch of other things. He looked like he thought he was getting away until he wasn't. And I think the RCMP and the MCC covered up all kinds of things, that he had a phone or a radio. He knew what the police were going. They never got in front of him over 13 and a half hours, which makes me think that he was in contact with someone right from the beginning, or all through it, that he was in contact with someone, and they never admit that he has a phone or a radio. And I show in one sequence, there's a really interesting sequence where Wortman's buddy, Rob Doucette, who later threatened to kill me and got convicted of that. Rob Doucette was being interviewed by the police. He came forward because he was concerned about what was going on. And in the interview of him by someone who was a Halifax cop who was part of the RCMP Halifax Joint Forces, was asking him questions. And when Rob said something that was indicated he was pointing at something that might be very, very, might have linked him to the police, the interview stops. He's, I got to go get a coffee. Then he comes back. And in this one instance, he comes back from being away and he says, next question. He goes, anything else you want to say, Rob? And Rob goes, he had a phone. It was an Android phone, and he kept it in the door of his truck, and his wife didn't even know about it.
Wow. And
know what the cop's response was? Excuse me, I got to take another break. Comes back and then changes the subject. And this happens. I show this time and time again with the interviewing process, how the story was never pursued at any level. So as I said, it's the negative proof, Rob. If you can prove their story is wrong, that means there's another truth out there. And from the evidence we've seen, you can infer that truth is Wortman was an informant and something was wrong there, and it was like a blown operation.
Your thoughts on the community and those impacted by this. And as you point out, I mean, look, there are some who think maybe you're digging too much, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of people, families included, who want answers, who are frustrated by how this has all been handled. You've got accounts of witnesses who say, well, I said this to the police and they ignored me, or they didn't listen to this part, or they ignored that part. So clearly there are people who deserve to know and want to know what happened here.
Well, the families, like almost the witnesses at the Irving Big Stop, the family members all were forced to sign DNAs and NDAs
Right.
with the government, non-disclosure agreements. They avoid me like the plague because their financial interest in the long run is cooperating with the government. And a lot of the families don't want to get to the bottom of it because there's things there that are a little messy. But my point of this from the beginning was, I'm not there. I'm there for the dead, to get justice for the dead, but it's also a public policy issue. It's the integrity of the RCMP and the institutions of Canada and what is going on. I mean, Canada, in my mind, has largely been shaped by public policy that is not based on the facts. It's based, public inquiries that have shaped debate and shaped policy that maybe we should have gone in another direction. And this one, where they basically said, oh, the RCMP should be taken out of contract policing, but none of that is getting done. They don't really mean it. They're still trying to hold on to this federal police force operating with federal rules as provincial and municipal police. And they're not accountable. And this shows that they're not accountable.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask, Paul. I mean, has anything actually really changed? The MCC was supposed to not just tell us what happened, which maybe they didn't do, but to bring about some real fundamental change. But it just feels like if this happened today, the massacre happened today, what would be different?
No, there's been nothing different. I mean, the RCMP is still selling itself as a contract police force, even though it's now lost its biggest contract in Surrey, BC, and it's lost Grand Prairie. Kelowna's they're now their biggest one, is threatening to go to its own municipal police force. It's falling apart across the country. They can't attract members, and even now, local and provincial authorities everywhere are saying, well, they're not really accountable, are they? We have no control over them. And that doesn't make for a good police service in any community.
So what do you hope this book and your work can accomplish? Like, where do we go from here, do you think, Paul?
Well, number one, this is still not the end, because this book proves that what they were saying was not true in almost every case. They made things up. They made stories up. They ignored witnesses, manipulated the evidence. Number one, I think that, if you want to go to, modern true crime series, who killed Corey Ellison? I think Wortman may have killed 20 or 21 people. 2 of the deaths I'm suspicious of. And so is the community, many members of the community. About 5 weeks ago, after the book was done, I had someone contact me who'd been contacting me over the years. I didn't realize their connection. And then they got back to me a few minutes after contacting me and saying, my cousin was at Portapic, one of the police there. And my other cousin and I believe that our cousin shot Corey Ellison. Do you know that? And I said, well, I've gone through the evidence and I think I know who you're talking about. And it turned out it was. That's out there. And I think that's worth pursuing in the public interest. Secondly, I continue to believe the RCMP, we need new federal policing, an independent force in Canada, and provincial and municipal police forces that are run by the provinces and municipalities that are accountable to those local jurisdictions. Otherwise, our police system is screwed up, and it's not good public policy. It's time for a change.
Yeah. The book is out now, as mentioned. It's called Anatomy of a Coverup, The Truth About the RCMP and the Nova Scotia Massacres. Paul Palango, thank you so much for making some time for us here. Really appreciate this.
Anytime, Rob. Thank you.